Welcome to the Religious Treehouse. I'm Jody.
And I'm Matthew.
Thank you for joining us today. Matthew, how you feeling?
Oh, I'm doing good. It's a nice, gloomy, rainy day out, so that's nice. But I'm about ready to head home to visit some family and stuff, so that's exciting. It's a
Oh,
good
it
time.
is.
It's a good time to be me, I suppose. How are you doing?
I'm okay. My dad had surgery yesterday, so I was a little worried, but he's doing good. And now I'm just thinking about, the upcoming holidays. Where am I going to be? What are we going to do? And I think that really helps lead us into today's topic because you know what's coming up.
Tell us what's coming up, Jody.
Christmas. It's a time for giving presents to the people you love. And for some people, it's a time to celebrate the birth of a little baby. Now,
Yeah.
have you ever heard the nativity story, Matthew?
No, Jody, tell me about it.
Once upon a time, in a land far away from the United States, there was an angel that came to this girl, Mary. And the angel told Mary, "You're gonna have a baby." And Mary was like, "I don't even have a husband, bro." And the angel was like, "Don't worry. The Holy Spirit will fill you." And she was like, "But I'm promised to Joseph." And so then Joseph found out they still got married. She was with a baby. Everyone's like, "Oh, it's Joseph's baby." And then they had to go to Bethlehem to do things. And so they traveled on donkey and they went all the way to Bethlehem from where they started, which I cannot remember the name of. Galilee. Galilee?
Galilee.
Galilee. Okay, from Galilee to Bethlehem. And there they got there and there was no room for them. And dare I say no room in the inn. And they had to give birth to baby Jesus in a barn. Isn't that wild?
Crazy.
And while they were in that barn, a bunch of people showed up. Three wise dudes came with gifts. A bunch of shepherds and their flock came. Angels were singing over them. And this was the promised child. And his name was Jesus. And that is the birth story.
Yeah. No, fantastic. Love to hear it. Not sure what your sources are, but I'd love to hear them. Uh,
An
but
upbringing in the church and then the 5-minute children's video I watched
yeah,
because I needed a quick refresher.
yeah, no, but that definitely I think sums up the general milieu, the general vibes that people think of when they think of the Christmas story, the Jesus being born. But I think here today in this fun discussion, we're gonna see what the Bible is talking about here, and kind of try to look at it from a more scholarly perspective,
I would love to
see
do
what's
that.
going on. Yeah, see
Yeah.
what's going on in the Bible. But yeah, there's a lot going on, and I feel like we should start with some like a general vibe check because this is the first time in the podcast that we've ventured into the New Testament. So this is obviously different than what we've talked about with in Genesis and Esther and Scientology. Um, but I think first of all, it's important to note that we're in first century CE, so some background information, I guess, before we dive into it. Um, and the birth narratives that we're reading today are in Matthew and Luke. The only time that these birth narratives are really discussed ever, yeah, you might make an exception for a chapter in John where someone briefly asks, "Where were you born? Were you born in Bethlehem? How can you be a Messiah if you weren't born in Bethlehem?" Um, but that's John. But the birth stories that we're talking about are chapters 1 and 2 of Matthew and Luke, which is actually a relatively late writing for the New Testament. So the Gospel of Mark was written before Matthew and Luke, and most of Paul's writings were written before Matthew and Luke as well. So, and there's stuff that's written later than these two books too, but it's relatively late, at least 50 years after Jesus died. So we're around 80 CE when this is
Okay.
being written.
And Matthew and Luke, were they disciples?
Yeah, okay, so that's a good. We'll talk about this more at some other episode. But so Matthew is listed as a disciple, and Luke is a companion of Paul. But the names that we've attributed to these books are just names. The authors are anonymous.
Oh.
And so we don't know who's doing this. They've just been attached later on to give it kind of some sort of, oh, the Gospel of Matthew, the Gospel of Mark. I know what you're talking about.
So they didn't write them.
No,
Matthew and Luke.
no.
No, no.
Matthew and
Matthew, the
Luke,
tax accountant, and Luke, the physician, did not write these.
no, they did not. That's a whole big discussion. We can talk about that some other point. But for now, we can assume the Gospels are anonymous.
Okay.
It's also, I think, for our conversation, going to be really important to note that Matthew and Luke were written about the same time. Mm-hmm. Most scholars would put Matthew being a little bit earlier than Luke, and Luke used Matthew for some of his sources when Luke wrote his gospel. And both Matthew and Luke most likely used Mark for sources for their gospel as well. So I think, that's a very brief introduction to like what we're getting into here. But I think it'll have to do for now until we get into the meat of what's going on in these gospels. But for now, we're talking about the first 2 chapters of Matthew and Luke.
So Matthew starts off with the genealogy. And if you guys haven't read the genealogy in Matthew, you are missing out because I love a good genealogy. That's why I've done so many DNA tests. I'm like, I want to know where I'm from. But this gives everything listed out from Abraham to Jesus.
Yeah.
Very nice. It's very orderly. They kind of like, I get lost at some points, like Judah, no idea who Judah is. Salmon? I didn't know Salmon was a name. Then it picks me back up in verse 6 with King David and Solomon. Lose me again. I think I know Amos. And then I think I'm back in it with Jacob. But it was really cool to me because it split it up into 3 different 14 generations, and 14 times 3 is 42. And according to Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, that is the meaning of life. What a fun coincidence.
Yeah, okay. So there's a lot to be said about these genealogies. It tracks that a lot of these names are just, names that mean, like, if you're not like involved in the and super knowledgeable, nerdy about the Hebrew scriptures and stuff, these are just words. Judah, as you said, I don't know who that is. Probably one of the most important figures of the Joseph story, and or one of the it's one of the big tribes of Israel. But I think the point of this genealogy mainly is to point back at David. We really want the gospel writer of Matthew really wants to attach David to Jesus. So by going back through David, that's really the point. And I've heard, to the 14 generations, anytime you get into numerology and stuff like that, I'm a little bit skeptical because that can be a little bit, but 14 in gematria, attributing numbers to letters, 14 is often associated with David. David spelled Dalet, Vav, Dalet. Dalet is 4, Vav is 6. 4 plus 6 plus 4 is 14.
Oh.
So that might be what's going on there, saying, hey, 14, 14, and 14. It's David, woo! I don't know if that's really what's going on here, but it might be what's happening. But, and then you mentioned Jacob as a name that you recognized, right?
Yeah.
Which Jacob? When you saw that?
There you go.
What?
I said my little brother.
Yeah.
No.
No, but I think you were referring to that as Jacob, the father of Joseph, right?
Yeah.
Right. So interesting. We go to Luke chapter 3, which I didn't have you read for this, but I think chapter 3 is where we have the genealogy for Jesus. And let's see if I can find it. Maybe it's chapter 4. It's after Jesus' baptism. And what we have there is a very different genealogy of Jesus, going all the way back to Adam. But um, it's a much longer genealogy, and it doesn't match with the Matthew genealogy as well. And it switches off immediately at Joseph's father, who's not Jacob. I'm not remembering who that is off the top of my mind right now. But the point of these gospel authors is to tie Jesus back to the Hebrew Bible in some way or form. And the Matthew really likes attaching Jesus back to Egypt and Moses. So what's happening here is Matthew's most likely the inventor of the birth narrative, the first person who wrote down the birth narratives. So Matthew, by placing Joseph as Jesus's father and Jacob as Joseph's father, is supposed to resemble what we see in Genesis, where we see Jacob being the father of Joseph once again. And Joseph is famous, his multicolored coat, however you want to translate that. I'm sure that'll come up at some point. But Joseph, known for really being the first people to bring, Israelites, or I guess they're not Israelites at that time, but to bring Hebrews into Egypt. And we see that again with Joseph later in the Matthew story, that Joseph is bringing Jesus into Egypt. So, just starting off with the genealogies right there's a lot being said in the subtext that I think is really important to understand. I know I said a lot of words. Is that tracking?
No, that tracked, and I think that's very interesting because you don't, when you're learning about this stuff, it's very much parsed out, and you don't really look at the connections.
Mm-hmm.
At least when you're learning this in a very surface level Bible study, Sunday school setting.
Yeah.
And so I hadn't made that connection. I mean, the connection between Jesus and Moses is one I've started kind of coming around to, like the comparisons between the two of them
Mm-hmm.
as figures. Um,
Yeah, and that we see that especially in Matthew. Matthew really wants to say, "Hey, this Jesus guy is the second Moses. He's this new Moses, and is really giving Jesus that authority to be this new bringer in of laws, this new high authority figure." So Matthew really, really likes saying, "Hey, you remember Moses? Remember Jesus? Do they look similar? Should we kind of respect them and think of them in similar ways?" So there's definitely an attempt to conflate Moses and Jesus together as two similar and very important figures that do, similar things in very different ways for very different people.
okay. No, that makes a lot of sense. And now I would like to change this to a Moses episode, but we're on track.
Yeah.
Okay, so we get the genealogy and then the birth story actually starts.
Mm.
And it says that an angel comes to Mary and says, "Don't worry, baby girl. Well, you're about to be filled with the Holy Spirit." And she's like, I ain't got no ring. Um, right?
Yeah.
This is, yeah. But and then it okay, so it
Well,
says engaged, but refers to
well,
Joseph as her husband. So
start
I'm
over. Where are we?
no, I was just, it says she's engaged, but then it refers to Joseph as her husband and that he plans to divorce her. Does that just mean break the engagement?
Right. Okay. So I think what we've done here is we've done the thing where we've been so ingrained that these are two of the exact same stories that they go together, and we've conflated the two things because we're in Matthew right now, right?
Oh, the angel doesn't go to Mary and tell Luke.
Right. Right.
The angel goes to Joseph and Matthew. See, I
Yeah.
like the
No.
Red Sea, got to part these.
No. And I think this is why these conversations are so important because when we look at, especially something as so important to people as the birth stories, it's so easy to conflate these things as the two stories that say the exact same thing. But if we want to respect the Bible as the text, as it was written, as it was provided, um, through tradition throughout, thousands of years as Christians have accepted this as tradition, it's important to recognize what Matthew is trying to tell his readers and what Luke is trying to tell his readers. It and that can make a lot of Christians uncomfortable, because what it sounds like I'm saying is that there are discrepancies and one of them must be right and one of them must be wrong, and that is what I'm saying. Like, this isn't, as we talked about in with Genesis, this isn't exactly a historical account. This is, much more close to a historical account than I would say what Genesis is trying to do. But this is still has very much of an agenda, I suppose. That's not the right word. A rhetorical goal, I suppose. The gospel writers aren't depicting history as history. They're depicting this story in a way that they want to make theological claims in order to make sense of things for their readers. And that's why they appeal back to the Hebrew Bible so much. It's because they want to, try to connect these two things in the reader's mind.
Okay. So then Matthew starts off with the angel visiting Joseph.
Right.
And saying Mary is pregnant.
Yeah, notably in a dream, because we were conflating those two again. We're saying, remember Joseph the dreamer back in Genesis, and Joseph, Jesus' father, like both of them are coming in dreams. But yeah.
Okay, so comes to Joseph in a dream. I just got stuck on the technicalities of it saying they're engaged, but then refers to Joseph as her husband, that he plans to quietly divorce her, but they're not even married yet. But he took her as his wife anyways.
No, it's this idea that like Joseph thinks, ooh, Mary may have fooled around with someone else. I'm not vibing with this. And so the angel has to come and say, no, it's all right. This is all in the plan. We've got the Holy Spirit doing the Holy Spirit's thing. Like, it'll be okay. And Joseph's like, all right, cool, I'm on board.
Okay. And then the angel says, she shall name the baby Emmanuel, and we get the name Jesus, but that just may be my own hang up.
No, okay. So that's an important thing to note, because what is that? Matthew 1:23?
Yes.
So I think there we're quoting Isaiah. What is it? Isaiah 7? 23. Isaiah 2. No, it is Isaiah 7. What am I doing? But what we have here is something that Matthew really loves to do. Referring to Isaiah 7:14, where it says, therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. Look, the young woman is with child, and she'll bear a son, and she'll name him Emmanuel. Now, there's a lot of important things to note here, because this is a very contentious verse. Starting with your point, the Emmanuel. Emmanuel means God with us. I'm sure you've heard that in church all the time. In the context that Isaiah is using it, that means God is on our side, God supporting us. And in no sense of the word is Isaiah claiming that this is an incarnate God on earth with us. The gospel writer of Matthew is kind of using that to say, actually, this is an incarnate God with us on earth. And this is a common theme of Matthew. He likes, and Luke too, all the gospel writers do this to some extent. And this is, perhaps an early form of midrash, not exactly how midrash is, how we, perceive it, but the idea of kind of using sporadic verses, sporadic quotes from sacred scripture to make meaning, to make a prophecy about the current time is, fairly unique and a growing theme in this era. So does that track? You look confused.
So they're just trying to tie it back to the Old Testament?
Yeah, so it's very important for them that this new David figure, this new messianic figure, is tied back to the Hebrew Bible in some way. And so they do that by looking at these verses in the Hebrew Bible and saying, see, this must refer to Jesus, even though it's in past tense, even though it's talking about things in different contexts. It's a way for them to connect the two stories and to give it some sort of authority. And that's not unique to what these gospel writers are doing. It's a fairly common methodology of that era. Um,
It just seems wrong. I don't know why.
yeah,
It
well,
just
no,
seems
it's
like you're
different.
picking and choosing.
Yeah, it's different than how we would do things now.
Yeah.
But I don't think that I don't think differences in methodologies like that would should or would decrease the level of importance this story is saying for a Christian.
No, definitely not. And I agree with that. I just,
Mhm.
you grow up believing things are a certain way and you don't really dissect
Mhm.
why they are that way.
Yeah.
So I think that's maybe the confusion you're seeing on my face. My brain's rewiring as you watch. So if you watch the YouTube video, you can watch me melt my brain. Congratulations.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Okay,
the
but before we go on, the other very important thing that this verse is doing when Matthew quotes Isaiah 7:14 is that the word used for virgin, he's I won't say misquoting, but misrepresenting what word is being used there. Because in the Hebrew, the word there, Alma, is almost certainly referring to a young woman or a young girl of some sort like that. And then when that is translated into the Greek Septuagint, a much more vague word, which still could, refer to young woman, also has this added connotation of meaning a virgin of some sort. And the Septuagint is what the gospel writers always quote from. So by quoting from the Septuagint, using that as the word for virgin instead of a more appropriate word that would mean uh, young woman of sort, we're adding in this idea that it's a virgin birth.
Are you saying there's a mistranslation? That's
I'm
wild.
Yeah, but I'm not saying it's a mistranslation into English. I'm saying it's a mistranslation into Greek. Um,
Well,
but
yeah.
I think uh, there's much to be said about um, the Virgin Mary, and we'll get into that perhaps next year. Um, but and we'll talk about it a little more throughout this. But there's a lot to be said about that. But the idea that there's a virgin birth isn't unique to the story. Around that time frame, a virgin birth is something that connotes power and importance. So being born of a virgin is not common by any sense of the word, but not unheard of. And the point that both Matthew and Luke are trying to do by inserting this virgin birth is to kind of explain how Jesus can be resurrected. He's given this very important status from birth, and that kind of explains and gives authority that Jesus is more than this, more than basic human, giving authority for resurrection and what he does later in the Gospels.
So what I know you said we'll get to this later, but I guess what I want to know is like virgin birth. What does that look like? What does that constitute, I guess, in these times?
Yeah, I mean, I think it means in the general sense that we would use it today, without sexual intercourse. Um, and there's many theories about what this could mean, but this is also very serious doctrine held by most Christians that Jesus must be born of a virgin. And as a scholar, we can say that doesn't work. But as a religious person, like you don't have to follow the rules of scholars. Um, so it's much more religious
Okay.
importance.
Yeah.
You know
We'll talk about that.
metaphysical claims and whatnot. But no, I think there's much to be said, and I don't want to like misspeak on it because it's such an important
Okay.
conversation.
All right. So then they waited to sleep together until after they were married. That is
Yeah.
noted.
Yep, because we want to make sure that this is a virgin birth.
Virgin birth. Okay. And then so we get to Matthew 2. And they, what stuck out to me is in verse 5, they're like, the prophet. And I'm like, what prophet? You give me no name.
Yeah.
What prophecy?
No, yeah. So, like as I said, we really like referring back to the Hebrew Bible. We really like referring back to the prophets in particular. So in verse 5, what is that? Oh yeah. Going to verse 6, and you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means the least among the rulers. Okay, so that one should be Micah 5:2 that we're referring to, saying, "Born in Bethlehem." Micah said it. Remember that guy? Important.
Because we have arrived at with Herod in
Mhm.
Matthew 2. And the Magi, am I saying that right?
Yeah.
The Magi have arrived and they're like, just so you know, a king's about to be born.
Mhm.
And he would, the kingdom of Judah is not. What did that mean? The kingdom of Judah is not less than, like, it's just saying like everyone's important. Is that where we're getting?
Yeah. What are you referring to?
Uh, and you, the kingdom of Judah, is no lesser, I believe, was the verse around 5.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. So that's part of the prophecy that we're quoting from Micah. Is it Micah? I feel like I'm doing that wrong. Um, yeah, yeah,
Side
yeah.
note,
No,
love the
um,
Magi being astrologers.
yeah. Um, we'll touch on that, but yeah, the rulers of Judah. So when this was written, Judah was the big honcho for Israelite culture. Then there was the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. Northern kingdom was destroyed first. The southern kingdom was the tribe of Judah and Benjamin. Judah was the big tribe. That was what was left over after the tribe, or after the northern kingdom was left or was destroyed. So Judah, or Judahites, is really what we're referring back to there. It's like, hey, this is our group.
Okay. All right. Thank you. They keep just dropping in random profits. And I'm
Yeah.
like, could you give me a page number? Like, come on.
Yeah, well, because we should note that the verses and the chapters that we refer to have been added much, much later. So when these people were reading these things, they were much more well versed in Hebrew Bible than we were. So they could just say, "Oh, remember blah blah blah," and everyone would be like, "Yes, we know. Micah said that."
Okay. They're not walking around being like, I was told this in Bible school and I don't know where it came from.
Yeah.
Got it. So the Magi show up. They tell Herod, a king shall be born. And Herod's like, yo, let me know where that baby is. I would also love to worship him.
Mhm.
And
Yeah. No, the Magi, interesting folks from the east, which probably refers to Persia. Um, so these Persian Magi magicians, there's so much literature about this, like what this means. Most people translate it as Magi because that's a little vague. Astrologer, like the reason we would translate it as astrologer is because they follow this star. Like so astrologer could work, but maybe it's not like the best word. Magician, probably not the best translation. But it's this idea that they're wise men of some sort. Of they do some weird magical type of divination type stuff. Oh
I would like to throw out the term astrocartographer. Those are people that map the stars.
yeah, not a word that I've heard of before, but I'm down with that. We can call these the astrocartographers. Um, and there's also the sense that perhaps these are royalty of some sort. We hear that in the song "We Three Kings," which point of note, there's not three magi. It doesn't say how many magi there are. But the idea that these are kings isn't too far off. The idea that magi were royalty of some sort in Persia is a distinct possibility, and it would also lend itself to the possibility that, hey, we have these three, well, not three, they have three gifts. We don't know how many there are, but we have these people of power, people of royalty coming through Herod to see this king of Judeans that, might be a bit scary for Herod, and he might be feeling threatened if foreign royalty is coming for Jesus.
I would like to rescind the astrocartographer. I double checked. That is not what that means. But astrocartography we should get into. What do you mean it didn't say three magi? It
Yeah,
doesn't say three?
we just have wise men, we have magi, and then they give three gifts. And the
Oh,
reason we think there are three magi is because they have three gifts.
okay, but gold's heavy.
Yeah.
Frankincense had to be heavy, so did myrrh, and someone had to carry supplies. So we don't actually know.
Magi of unknown amount.
An unknown amount of magi rolled up. Interesting. Okay.
And yeah, and for the gold, frankincense, and myrrh that they're famous for giving, some people say, "Oh, that's gifts fit for a king, and it's a way for raising Jesus up." It's like, "Oh, this is a kingly figure," which would track for what Matthew was doing, in raising Jesus to in a Davidic light. I think more so the Magi were just kind of like, what are the three most expensive, fancy things we could get this important person? So I think that's more so the vibe. Maybe they're saying this is for a future king, but I don't think so.
What do you have in your pocket right now? Like, that could have been the conversation.
Yeah.
Like, what do you have in your pack that we can, because frankincense is scented, and, carrying a scented thing around you probably helps when you're going through places that may not smell great because they had sheep
Mhm.
around. Sheep smell awful. We'll get to that later. I have a whole thing on sheep. So it could have just been random things in their pack.
I think these were intentional,
Okay.
expensive items. They're very intentional gifts to denote that Jesus is important, and these are expensive things happening.
Okay. I'll accept that. My
Yeah,
brain is breaking from reading these things. So,
yeah,
um, and then they leave and they go see the baby.
yep. They leave Herod. They say, "Hey, baby Jesus, what's up, my friend? Here are some gifts." Uh, and then an angel comes to them, right?
Yes. And says, "Do not return."
Yeah, in a dream. Again, we have the angel appearing in dreams in Matthew. The angel appears in the dream and says, "Hey, don't go back to Herod. Go this other way back home." And the Magi are like, "Heard, chef." So they go back their other way, and they're gone from the story.
And then Herod's like, "Hey, I'm not taking any chances. Kill all the babies 0 to 2."
Yeah.
That's such a wide range. That was unhinged.
Yeah. Okay, so what this gives us some sense of what's happening here. We have Matthew quoting Jeremiah for some reason, saying a voice was heard in Ramah, wailing and loud lamentation. And see, again, this is Matthew bringing back a somewhat random verse for the present, um, referring to the people of Ramah were wailing and weeping because of everyone under two being called to be killed. But there's no historical evidence for this. Obviously this most likely didn't happen. There's nothing indicating that this was a historical decree by Herod. I think. Yep, you look confused.
No, not confused. I was just gonna say, wasn't there like the Pharaoh called for a bunch of babies to die when Moses was born?
Yeah, uh-huh. And I think that's exactly what's happening here. Matthew is saying, "Hey, remember when Pharaoh called for a bunch of babies to die with Moses?" And again, we have this idea that Jesus and Moses should be viewed in similar lights. So that's definitely I think what's happening here.
Okay.
The other thing we should note is that Herod died or ended his reign in 4 BCE. Um, and because he said 2 years and younger, we think maybe Jesus was born in 4, or not 4, in 6-ish BCE, based on Matthew's account. Um,
Okay.
so Matthew's account will put Jesus born in 5 or 6 BCE.
Okay. Okay. So Herod didn't take any chances. And then in verse 17, they talk about the prophet Jeremiah. Is that another previously alluded to prophet? Did they just
Um,
throw Jeremiah in there for funsies?
no, I mean, this is where I refer to Ramah
Oh,
and
got it.
them just bringing in wailers and weepers, weeping about these babies. But yeah, Jeremiah, another prophet that we like to quote.
And then what prophet said the Nazarene thing?
Um, that's the end of chapter 2, right?
Yeah.
So I think I've heard some um, where it's trying to attach it to Isaiah 11:1, where like it's similar to the word branch, and that's what's happening there. But there's nothing that I can find there. I did. I'm no expert on you know these stories, but through my research, the most I could find was maybe a reference to Isaiah 11. Maybe it's referencing something that we just don't have anymore, or maybe this is um, tying Jesus to the Nazarites, which we see happen in Luke a lot more. To the Nazarite vow, we see that with Samson and Samuel, uh, who Luke compares Jesus to somewhat. Um, or also, Jesus is referred to as a Nazarene. Jesus grew up in Nazareth, so this could just be a way to be like, and then Jesus grew up in Nazareth. That's how we all know Jesus as this Nazareth dude. So something along that's going on. It's a little confusing.
Okay.
I'm not too sure on that one.
Well, Joseph gets another dream, and the angel says, "Take them to Egypt. It's not safe here." And so they go to
Mm.
Egypt.
Yep. And again, this is referring to another prophet, Hosea, um, who's referencing back to the Exodus. Matthew says, "Hey, this is happening again. Whoop de woo." It's connected to the Old Testament, connected to the Hebrew Bible. So they go to Egypt again, referencing Moses. So yeah, it's all that.
Okay. And that is the first birth narrative.
Yeah, that's Matthew. Um, I think I think we should note a few things. This might be a long episode. Whoopsie. Um, that Herod is kind of the point of conflict that we have here. Herod's really the bad guy, and that is likely because this being written around 80 in the Common Era is after the destruction of the temple or the second Jewish temple, and Herod is the one who rebuilt the second temple. So we had the first temple destroyed, second temple built, second temple destroyed, second temple rebuilt, and that's what Herod's kind of claim to fame was. And there's even some claims out there that Herod was this Messiah figure because he um, rebuilt this temple. So Herod liked by some, not liked by others. Clearly, the Matthew account is trying to distance themselves from the temple and from Herod. So by creating Herod as the enemy, it distances these Christians from the temple. Uh, and any of this is also seen trying to distance themselves from the other Jews of the time when they blamed the Jewish leaders for Jesus's death instead of the Roman leaders. So Matthew is trying to distance himself from the Jewish sect around him and being a more Christian, separate identity.
Interesting choice.
Yeah.
All right.
Does that track? Do we have any?
That no, that tracks. That tracks. I just, you know me. I'm excited for Luke. I have things I want to say.
But yeah, but in summary, in summary, Matthew is doing, I want to say three things. He's doing more, but the three things that we're talking about here, four, we'll do four. He's connecting Jesus with David so that Jesus can be a messianic figure.
Mhm.
He's connecting to Jesus. He's connecting Jesus with Moses as this new bringer of laws. He's disconnecting their group with the Jewish group of the era, and he's providing uh, evidence and support for Jesus being a messianic figure. So that's the main thing that Matthew is doing.
So, in Matthew is the first book in the New Testament.
Mm.
So it's kind of like the introduction of like, the Old Testament. Well, here's this
Yeah,
kind of thing.
yeah, no, that's definitely that's I think all the gospels are doing that. All the gospels tie Jesus back to the Old Testament, but yeah, Matthew's definitely putting those connections front and center.
Okay. Good on Matthew.
And now Luke, what a fun story.
So Luke, you would think, does Luke 1 start where Matthew 1 starts? Do we also get no, we don't get a genealogy, not how you think. No. We talk about John.
Mm-hmm.
Why? I don't know.
No, and you bring up a good point. Why isn't Matthew's genealogy right off from the beginning like it was in? Why isn't Luke's genealogy right at the beginning, kind of like how Matthew's was? And I think, as most scholars do, we think that Luke is trying to hide this genealogy a little bit because as Luke was written after Matthew, a lot of what we'll see Luke doing is kind of correcting where Matthew may have misstepped. Um, or some Matthew makes claims that Luke may not be entirely comfortable with. So by kind of hiding Jesus's genealogy until after his baptism, it kind of sidesteps the question of, but we did this genealogy through Joseph, who's not Jesus's father, which is sketchy. So by Luke putting this genealogy that goes through Joseph, not Jesus's father, it kind of distracts the question away from the virgin birth again.
Oh, Luke. Come on, man. So it opens up, and my first question is, who is Theophilus? And Google said that could have been just like a general, hey, everyone.
Yeah, I think Theophilus was probably a Christian friend of Luke's or the writer of Luke. When we talk about the gospel narratives and all that, that'll come more into play. But for the sake of Jesus's birth, Theophilus isn't too important for us.
Okay. Theophilus. Learning vocab today. And then we get the story of Elizabeth and Zechariah.
Yeah, which we don't get at all in Matthew.
It, well, I just questioned why I got it this time. Like, no,
Yeah.
it was cool. It was like a super cool story. It felt long. It
Yeah.
felt long. It felt like a random add-in, kind of just to be like, Jesus. Well, here's his super cool cousin John, who
Mm.
also had a miraculous birth. And I don't know, it kind of felt like an allusion to he also could have been the chosen one, which, sorry to bring Harry Potter into this, but they do the same thing because either Harry or Neville Longbottom could have been the
Mm.
chosen one. So that's just, it kind of read similar to that to me.
Yeah, so the idea here is John is leading the way for Jesus.
Okay.
We see that in his birth. We see that in the baptism. It's possible that Jesus was a follower of John the Baptist, but the point made, especially by Luke and other accounts, is that John the Baptist leads the way for Jesus. So that's I think the main point, and we'll get into some of the details as the story goes on. But the main point that we should see here with John is that he's opening the path so that Jesus can come and do his thing.
Okay, I didn't read that. I may have misunderstood this entire thing. Let's go. So Elizabeth can't have a baby.
Right.
She is barren. She
Uh-huh.
feels like a disgrace. An
Yep.
angel comes in a dream.
Nope. Not in a dream.
Not in a dream.
I don't think that was one's in a dream. I don't remember this. That's not too important, but I think an angel just comes, right?
Okay. I think it is important whether it's a dream or not, but I again, this felt wild to me. The
Oh,
entire reading of Luke was a fever dream.
yeah. But also, the angel doesn't come to Elizabeth. The angel
No.
comes to Zechariah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. The angel comes to Zechariah while Zechariah is in the sanctuary, um, awake. These
Awake.
these are these are awake angels.
These angels are awake. Okay, so more akin to visions.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
More akin to visions. Okay, so the angel comes to Zechariah, and Zechariah doubts this angel because
Mhm.
this angel's like, Elizabeth's gonna have a baby, and Zechariah's like, no, like
Yeah.
we've been trying, my guy. And then the angel makes Zechariah mute,
Uh-huh.
and that is crazy
Yeah.
because he
Well,
doubted.
because he doubted, and obviously what you do is you make the person mute.
And so then Elizabeth is pregnant,
Mm.
and she's excited but sad because she felt disgraced for so long.
Yeah. So again, I think here we have references back to the Hebrew Bible. Here specifically, um, we're supposed to be reminded of Sarah and Abraham, where Sarah was barren and she was really old. She couldn't have a child until eventually a child came to her. Zechariah, I haven't seen too many notes about what Zechariah refers back to in the Hebrew Bible. I think that this is an attempt. Because Zechariah's name is referring back to the prophet Zechariah, who was big on the temple. Luke, as opposed to Matthew, Luke is very pro temple. Luke is like, hey, this temple thing, it's good. We like the temple. So that's something that Luke is trying to like switch away from Matthew. Like, hey, Matthew, calm down. Temple thing, cool.
Okay.
So Zechariah also very pro temple. So I think he could be doing that. The biggest example in my mind of when someone in the Hebrew Bible goes mute is the prophet Ezekiel. And prophet Ezekiel also goes mute. So that might also be referring back to that. So, but regardless, again, we have very intentional ties back to the Hebrew Bible.
Okay. And then it kind of lost me because then Mary came to visit,
Mm-hmm.
and the baby inside Elizabeth was so happy to see the baby inside Mary.
Yeah. Yep. Filled with the Holy Spirit. This John dude is filled with the Holy Spirit. It's good that John is leading the way for Jesus.
And then Mary has a song of praise.
Yep. And again, guess what this is doing?
Is it tying it back to the Old Testament?
It's tying it back to the Old Testament. Except this time we're reminded of Hannah giving birth to Samuel. So Hannah gives birth to Samuel. Samuel is also a Nazarite, which means can't cut your hair, can't drink, all that fun stuff. And we also see that given those commands given to John the Baptist. Um, but after Samuel is born, Hannah goes into this song of praise. And that's what Mary is doing here as well. So we're thinking, hey, remember Samuel? This and Samuel, very importantly, is the one that anointed King David. So just
Oh,
as Samuel anointed King David, John the Baptist is going to anoint Jesus. So here we have Jesus being referenced back to King David once again.
okay. Did you see the thing click? Did you see the
I
light bulb? It
yeah.
hit. Okay. 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 I think I'm finally starting to get it. And
Yeah.
then the baby is born. Everyone else is like, you want to name it Zechariah, right? And Elizabeth's like, no, John. And then Zechariah writes John, and suddenly he can speak again.
Yep. Woo, congrats, bro.
So, and then he was in the wilderness until the day he appeared publicly in Israel.
Yeah, John the Baptist known for being a wild boy.
My number, I guess I equate wilderness with redwood trees. I guess wilderness just means a desolate, not a very highly populated area. Or
Yeah. Remember, are you familiar with DC Talk?
oh, nope.
Oh my goodness. So we're gonna dive into Christian culture here for a second.
Okay.
DC Talk, big band in the '90s. Their big song was "Jesus Freak," um, and one of their bridges, and they're like the attempt for like Christian rap. They're kind of like the Christian attempt to be like Backstreet Boys, I'd say, something along those lines. And they say, "Oh my goodness, it embarrasses me that I remember these lyrics." But there was a man in the desert with gnats in his head. The sand that he walked was also his bed. The words that he spoke made the people assume, oh, words that he spoke. Oh my goodness. That's so embarrassing. I had so many and then I forgot. But the idea that John the Baptist is this, wilderness figure, this apocalyptic preacher, Jesus freak. Oh my goodness. It's so good. Everyone, don't look up the song. It's not a good song. But think about it. If you know the song, you know the song. But the idea, throughout Luke and the Gospels is that John is this, perhaps apocalyptic preacher leading the way for Jesus, and he hangs out in the desert. He's a big wilderness guy.
Hey, I justice for John, because now I am just picturing this matted haired, rugged,
Mm.
like maybe not justice for John. Maybe John got the better end of the stick.
John got beheaded.
John got beheaded.
Sorry, sorry, spoilers. That's that's a spoiler. Sorry for that. Sorry for ruining that one for you.
Head?
Oh yeah, sorry about that. Whoopsie.
All right, John's born. He's in the wilderness until he publicly appears in Israel. And then we get to Luke 2. And this time, Mary sees an angel, but it's not in a dream, correct?
Right, right. We've got Mary seeing the angel, not Joseph.
Not Joseph. And it's important to note that Mary and Elizabeth were cousins, right?
They were relatives.
Okay.
I'll give us that. I don't remember off the top of my head the specific, but yeah, they're supposed to be related in this story.
Well, because the Mark seemed to deal with like the Joseph lineage and Joseph side, and Joseph had the dream. And then this side, it's dealing with Luke. It's
Mm.
Mary's side of the family, and they're not having dreams of angels, they're just having angels come to them.
Yeah, okay, because remember Matthew was using Joseph to tie us back to the Joseph story of bringing them in and out of Egypt. They don't go to Egypt in Luke. Matthew doesn't need to use Joseph in that fashion anymore. So
Okay.
Joseph does whatever Joseph does. And we should note that Joseph isn't really a prominent character anywhere else in the Gospels. What likely happened is Matthew, in creating the story, made Jesus' father's name Joseph for the sake of the rhetorical goals that Matthew was trying to get across. And Luke, reading Matthew after Matthew wrote it, just decided to use the same name.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Yeah. So yeah,
So
Joseph's not being used in the same way here.
so they were just like, we'll just keep the name Joseph. It's a good name,
Yeah.
continuity's sake.
Yeah.
Um, and we're getting close to verse 7. So is there anything between now and verse 7 that you'd like to say before I continue?
Yeah. So we have in verse 1 of chapter 2 that the decree went out from Augustus to do a census. And for some reason, that means we all have to go back to our hometown or the town of our family. And again, there's no um, there's no historical evidence that they would require people to go back to their hometown. This is just a way to get Jesus in Bethlehem. Because, like Matthew, we're going to use Micah to say that Jesus was born in Bethlehem.
So
Um,
a
if we,
plot
if we,
device.
yeah. Because if we know in Matthew, we never really had to get to Bethlehem. It was just assumed that they were in Bethlehem, and then they do their trip to Egypt, do their thing in Egypt, and they bring them back to Nazareth. So it's a plot device to get them into Bethlehem. Um, Quirinius, not my Greek words aren't great, um, but he ruled around 6 CE. So that would put Jesus's birth in Luke to be about 6 CE. So there's some discrepancies about when Jesus would be born based on these two different gospel accounts. I think most scholars place Jesus around 5 BCE, if I remember correctly. So this one is further off from the historical Jesus.
Okay. Now, we keep saying BC, and I understood that as before Christ. I thought 0 was when Christ was born.
No, yeah. um, that I don't know the exact reason for that, but I assume there was some monk a few thousand years ago that said this is about when Jesus was born, and then as we've like learned more about history and stuff, we've learned it's off by a few years.
Okay. Because now I'm thinking about the fact that AD means after death, and that would leave like a 33-year gap where there was just no years.
Sure, AD stands for Anno Domini, which is a Latin phrase. And we just try to make it easier in English and say after death. This is why I try to generally use BC and or BCE and CE before the Common Era. The Common Era, it's not a big deal. It's just one, it's a little more accurate based on like we don't really know the exact time Jesus was born, and two, it's kind of more inclusive to people who don't set their calendars by Jesus, and it kind of it invites people of other faiths into the conversation.
That's what I want to do. So I'll start using that. And it isn't a big deal unless that's what you grow up your entire life thinking.
Yeah.
And then it's an entire shift. Okay. BCE, CE. Got it. Are we at verse 7 yet?
Go for it.
They said he was laid in a manger and there was no room in the room. Nowhere did I read in. Nowhere. It just said manger. Here's my thing. A manger is just a feeding trough. A
Mm.
manger can be moved. Nowhere in what I read did I read barn, but I have been taught my entire life he was born in a barn. And you can justify it by saying, no, Jodie, you were told he was born in a manger. Why is there a barn in the nativity scene? I have been seeing barns every Christmas, every year since I was born.
Yeah. So what we have here is, I've seen people say, no, Jesus was born in a cave. He was born in a stable. What I think is most likely being indicated by this text is Joseph and Mary came to Bethlehem, not on a donkey. Note that a donkey is never mentioned,
Yeah.
but very often presented in um, depictions of Jesus doing this. And that's because a donkey is mentioned in a later apocryphal text, but that's beside the point. Yes,
I
Jody?
was going to say, is it because Jesus rode in on a donkey shortly before he was crucified? And perhaps this is to show he came into this world kind of on donkey, like,
Maybe. Yeah, maybe. But again, these are later biblical
okay,
interpretations.
sorry.
Not, we don't have that in Matthew or Luke. Um, but the idea, so what likely happened, Joseph, and it would make sense that pregnant Mary would need some sort of animal transport, but that's beside the point.
Yeah.
But it would make sense that Joseph and Mary coming in to their, town of origin where their family lived and stuff, were perhaps rooming with their family, rooming with the place. And the problem was that there's no more room in the lodging area, in the place where they would kind of reside. So how first century structures, first century homes were built were on the second floor you had your sleeping area where you'd like do your stuff, and on the bottom floor is where you'd have your animals and your storage and stuff like that. So what is likely happening here is there's no room upstairs in the sleeping area for Mary and Jesus, so they moved them downstairs where there's room. So they're not, perhaps it would be kind of like a garage in our modern sense. Um,
Yeah.
I guess that would be the closest connection that we have based on our modern
Yeah. They
vocabulary.
they brought the animals in for like warmth because they didn't have central heating.
Right.
So like the animals provided a lot of warmth. Can you hear that?
No.
No, okay, that's good. So I mean, it would keep them warmer, and also labor is like a big messy deal. So if other people are needing to get rest because they have to work,
Yeah. Well, they're here for the census. They got to be prepared for the
yeah.
census that apparently is this big deal.
So yeah, I can wrap my head around that. It just, you see this depiction again
Mhm.
and again and again and again, and you're like, obviously that's the way it went. And my favorite joke around Christmas time is to go, there's no room at the inn. No inn
Yeah.
involved. No inn, no donkey. There may have been more than three magi. But moving on. Okay. Oh, and then I did say, and in Matthew 2:11, it says the Magi entered a house.
Yeah, yeah. So it again, we don't have this problem in Matthew. It's kind of included in Luke, and it's this big point in our modern retelling of stories for some reason.
The pageantry has been centered around this. Like
Yeah,
the literal pageants, you were Joseph. My
yeah,
little sister was Mary, and you had baby Jesus in a manger, and you were surrounded by barn animals, and there
mm,
was a star above you. And it's just become so ingrained that I never even thought to actually sit and read the narrative.
yeah, yeah. And where we have in Matthew, we have this Jesus fit to be a king, this very fancy, highfalutin Jesus. And here in Luke, we have much more of the humanity of Jesus and the humble beginnings of Jesus being emphasized. So I think that's what Luke is doing here with that story.
He accomplished it very well
Yeah.
because he downplayed everything. He's like, they had to go through this arduous journey, and then they arrived somewhere, and he had to sleep in a manger. And in this one, it's not magi that show up, but shepherds.
Mhm. Yeah. Again, very, very humble. It's not the fancy people. It's the regular dude, regular shepherd.
So we get the angel comes to the shepherd. Does it mention an angel in this one?
Yeah. No, the angel comes to the shepherds and say, "Hey, this Jesus dude. Remember this Jesus dude? Cool dude." And then at that point, we get the heavenly host or the heavenly army um, singing to God, saying, "Glory to God in the highest." That famous point. So we get angel, and then we get angels, and we're going back to angel later.
Okay, and so but Mary is very chill by all of this, by the way. She's just given birth and she's like, "Oh,
Yeah,
come in, Magi. Come in, shepherds." And shepherds smell. I feel everyone should know that sheep are the stinkiest thing on this earth. The oils
sure.
they produce are awful. And so that's very humble.
Yeah. Also, I don't think they have the same cleanliness standards as we did. So, I don't think Joseph or Mary would meet um, I don't think they would pass our nose test either.
Oh, no, no, no. But I'm saying by anyone's standards, if you've
Yeah,
met a sheep, you have met the worst stench in your life.
sure.
Um, and so then this section after that, I feel like is random men praising the baby,
Okay, yeah.
right? Like, because like they show you such humble beginnings, and then they go to a temple and they're like, oh my goodness, this baby is so special. They meet this guy who's like, I can, I what I read from it was basically he's like, I can now retire.
Yeah, yeah. Are you talking about Anna and um oh, I'm blanking on his and Simeon?
Yes.
Yeah. So what we have here is, after Jesus' birth, um, Jesus gets circumcised. He follows all the rules. They go up to Jerusalem, um, and do all the ritual duties that they're supposed to do. It's very important that Luke depicts Joseph and Mary and Jesus following all the ritual laws, all the religious laws, because again, we're tying Jesus close to the temple. So if we're tying Jesus close to the temple, and if we're getting these prophets at the temple, um, Simeon and Anna, to approve of Jesus and to say these good things about Jesus, we're also tying Jesus very closely to the temple.
Oh, more temple.
More temple.
More temple. I don't want to say the word propaganda, but more temple support.
Yeah, no, it's these rhetorical goals that are being made by these authors.
So they just really emphasize how cool this kid is to give credibility to what the angel Gabriel was saying, I feel like.
Yeah, yeah. And then there we go. Do we have that's the end of that. Do we have any thoughts before I move on to our summary of Luke?
Um, I elect that in nativity scenes from now on, instead of a barn, everyone goes into a random one-bedroom apartment
Mm,
and takes a trough.
yeah.
No, that might be my more extreme suggestion. I guess no, nothing else to say about Luke, and we can summarize and do a more general.
Yeah. Yeah. No, so like I think what Luke does a lot more than Matthew that we need to focus on is Luke seems to be much more anti-imperialist. Luke seems to be doing a much more um, problem with Rome. Luke has, problems with Rome. So for example, when the angels come and sing to the shepherds, the angels sing, and on earth peace among those from whom he favors. Famously, we hear that as peace on earth. We hear that every Christmas.
Yeah.
And I think what Luke is doing there is reversing the Pax Romana, the Roman peace, that Rome puts out as their slogan. So Luke is saying peace in Rome, no, no, peace on earth. And we're kind of upping Jesus um, as Jesus as this contender against Caesar, where that's who Jesus is being conflated as. We see that again through him being referenced as David, just as Matthew did. But we've got this gear to grind against Rome, and that's also why uh, we're conflating Jesus with the temple. If because again, Rome has destroyed this temple, we're mad at Rome. So what's the logical successor to the temple now that it's been destroyed? Jesus. So if we tie Jesus close to this temple, if the followers that read this say, what do we do now that this temple is gone? Luke is providing the framework to say we move on from the temple through and go through Jesus. So I think that's a lot of what Luke is doing.
Okay. So Matthew and Luke both had their reasons for writing it the way they did. There's some similarities,
Yeah.
some differences. Um, I don't know. To me, Matthew felt a lot more like source material, and Luke felt like the expansion of.
Yeah, no, it's very likely that Luke used Matthew as as a source and then tweaked it for his rhetorical goals.
His own purposes. It's kind of
Mhm.
similar to the Wizard of Oz and Wicked. I don't know if you know this, but the Wizard of Oz obviously came first, but then the author of Wicked was like, okay, yeah, but what if Glinda and Elphaba went to college together?
Okay.
So this felt kind of similar to this because it was like, yeah, Jesus was born, but did you know about his super cool cousin John?
Yeah.
Just because we spend so much time with John.
Mm.
Um, no, I don't know. It's really interesting. And I honestly think looking at it this way made this story so much cooler.
Yeah. No, I think, and hopefully this will be our closing thought because we've gone way too long. I think talking about it this way can be really threatening to a lot of Christians because it points out the flaws and concerns with these two stories. And I think that by pointing out these flaws and concerns, I don't think that makes these texts less important, less true. I think the theological message that these authors are trying to get across come across just as well, whether or not there are a few discrepancies here and there. Um, and I think a lot of atheists will use these claims to be like, see, this is why your religion is false. And I think that's going a bit out of reach and doesn't need to be taken that way. But I think if you're going to respect this, if you claim to respect the Bible as the source, as the Word of God, as many Christians do, whatever that means, in order to take the Bible on its own terms instead of force these doctrines onto it, I think it's imperative to really understand what the biblical authors are trying to get across. So if we can understand these texts not as the unfallible literal truth, we can understand it as human authors with human motives and theologies that is trying to express. I think that can be really generative and helpful for a lot of Christians as well.
I mean, this might be too simple and it might be really dumbed down, but what I'm getting is that symbols of hope can come from anywhere.
Sure, sure.
Like it can come from the least likely of places or where you expect it.
Yeah. Sweet. Well, that's our thoughts on the birth narratives of Jesus. I'm sure there's so much that we missed, and I'm sure there's some things that we got wrong, but I'm sure this is another one of those stories that we'll be revisiting. But thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next time. Be sure to, like and subscribe and follow us on socials. Bye.
Bye guys.